Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
We're already beginning the conversation of what we wanted to talk about today, focusing, halachically on the question about wine or food that is, brought in problematic ways on Shabbat, that's brought in a car or a taxi in this case. But I think more broadly than just thinking about like the halacha of what the status of that wine or food is, just sort of the conversation we're already starting to have about those awkward Shabbat meal moments, which I'm sure many of us have had, in which we either bring or are at a meal or hosting a meal where someone else, brings something that where there's something off, either halachically or we're thinking halachically, but also could be in other ways, and sort of how to navigate that. And we saw that really clearly, I think, in this episode, in which, if Nati hadn't made the point of, hey, she's paying the taxi driver, oh, she brought it in a taxi, and then he sort of whispered, no one would have known, and it would have been fine. But Nati sort of pushing it, and in spite of that, I don't know, Amir and Yifat, I think, potentially could have handled that whole situation differently as well. It's tough. It's one of these really tough, sort of situations about what do you do when someone unknowingly does something problematic, and how do you avoid embarrassing them while also not violating your standards, your halachic standards? So I think that that's sort of what we're going to look into and talk about today. I don't know, Rabbi Schatz, if you have the initial thoughts on that you want to share. I see a lot of people have things to say, and I'm sure people have stories as well to share about this. So I saw Denise first. So Denise, why don't you chime in, and then Debbie and Steve.
So I think the key word was unknowing, because Hodaya knows. And earlier in the show, the boyfriend tells her, oh, they never compromise and this and that. And it kind of bothered me, because it would, and I feel like this happens in the world too, not just on the show, where people sort of conflate loyalty to religion and really to God, and loyalty to friends and loved ones and families, and I feel like that's not fair, number one, to ask people to put those together or separate them out. They each have their own, they're separate relationships in my mind. And Hodaya knew that. She wasn't just stumbling into something. It's almost like she was daring them. Do you love me enough? And they love her enough to want to be with her, but that doesn't mean that they're asking her to come in and knowingly violate something and put them all in a bad spot and make them potentially violate something that they're not interested in crossing that line.
So I think
it's a really bad spot.
So I think this is a really interesting point. So halachically, and this is what we were talking about for those who are with us before the episode, is actually this exact case, and how the halacha, the law, the Jewish law, differentiates between mazid and shogeg, someone who does something like this. I mean, the original case is cooking on Shabbat accident. You left something you didn't turn off the fire, you left a pot on the stove, and it cooked during Shabbat, or something like that. And the halacha differentiates between intentional and non-intentional, and says, if there's different opinions, but we're always more lenient if it's accidental. And Denise is bringing up this point about Hodaya and saying Hodaya knows. And when we were talking about it earlier, Rabbi Schatz brought up the point, maybe she actually doesn't know. She knows you can't get in a car on Shabbat, but does she necessarily know that bringing something on Shabbat in a car has halakhic ramifications? Maybe not. She might not actually know that, because she just grew up knowing don't get in a car on Shabbat, and she might actually have no idea that it has kashrut implications. So when halacha, like in this case, sort of differentiates based on intention, how are we able to discern intention? In this case, I'm actually not so sure that we can discern her intention. She might actually have, and judging from her reaction, maybe it's that she feels like they chose religion over her, or maybe it's like she actually had no idea that this was going to be like, that this was problematic, that it would make the wine something that they couldn't drink. It didn't even occur to her, and now it's sort of, it's like
she doesn't seem curious when it finally comes out in the open. She's not like, what are you talking about? What's the deal? She knows what they're talking about. They're not surprised.
They also say, but you brought it in a cab. So then she puts two and two together. But I think part of what I was sharing before, that remember in the first season, which feels like a million years ago, but their lives is not actually a million years ago. She lived in the home that was doing the hosting. So she never had to worry about any kind of traveling, any kind of kashrut. She didn't have to worry about any of that because it was just happening in her home. And I think that as soon as her boyfriend or whatever, the man in her life, starts to tell her that she's only going to be allowed to bring wine, because remember in Israel also, we are not going to get into this topic right now, but remember in Israel, when you buy wine, like generally if you're buying it in Jerusalem, it's not going to be hard. It will be harder for you to find an unhechshered bottle of wine, as opposed to if you're in America, that might be a harder thing to come by. And we can talk about kosher wine some other time. But the fact that she would be bringing wine would be something that was easy for her to do. And so she already felt bad about the fact that she was being told to bring something that was kind of like the secular item for Shabbos. And so I really don't think that she knew. Like, I think there are just certain things that people who grow up really frum actually don't know as much as people who come from a background that isn't as observant and then all of a sudden are keeping more of these laws, because you have to come to laws through understanding them and learning them rather than just doing things because that's what your parents did and that's what your grandparents did and then that's what you did, and not necessarily knowing why. And so I think that Rabbi Pernick is correct that she got in a car. She knew that was a no-no, but she didn't necessarily know that all of her subsequent actions were going to be then determined as, like treif, so to speak, based on her getting into the car.
Yeah, and also you persuading me, because I'm just thinking, like, one of my closest friends got married really young, and she lived in New York, and I went to see her. And I wanted to come over on Shabbat, and her husband said no. He said I was welcome to come for the whole Shabbat, but I couldn't come just, for 3 hours in the afternoon because I was going to take the subway and I wasn't staying in Queens and whatever. And I was like, okay, whatever, I'm not coming. But, so it's possible that it just didn't come up for her. It's also possible that if she did know those rules and she knows that they're already allowing her to come by cab, because presumably she's not living close enough to be walking, and, so maybe she just thinks that they're going to be okay with whatever she does and not hold her to that too.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great point. I have many stories, but let's hear from other people first. One of them having to do with another Pernick, which I can tell the story of. The Mishiks, and then Renee, and then Eileen, and then Jeff. Wow, there's a lot of people. Okay, let's start with the Mishiks.
So 2 things. One is that when we used to have dinner at the Chabad rabbi's house, they would always ask us to bring the wine before Shabbat. So we knew that. But also, above all, isn't there a prohibition against embarrassing people? And so aside from the wine piece, Nati was embarrassing her from the beginning. And even Amir, when he threw the towel at her, they were embarrassing her. And I thought, we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that if it were left to Amir and Yifat, I actually don't know that they would have done anything different. They would have used that wine, and I think they just would have, like you're saying, like made her feel comfortable for just being there and doing something. But Nati took it so far that then Amir was like, well, will Nati not drink it? And how can I kind of appease this situation without being confrontational, because I'm a guy and I don't do that. So they're just, trying to figure out how they're going to work their way through this moment. And I think if it was just up to Yifat and Amir, they would have been totally fine with it. Or maybe not totally fine, but they would have gone upon the principle of, we don't want to embarrass her, we're just going to use the wine, like you're saying. In terms of the washing of the hands, I think that Amir just kind of assumed that even if you're not from on Shabbat, most people, if the people around you are washing their hands, like go and wash their hands, even if the rest of the week before you eat, you don't wash your hands.
I think he's also like just trying to make, he's like almost lighten the mood. It's like, come on, you're at home here. It's sort of that sense of like, there's already like that sense of divide, and he sort of throws the towel and she throws the towel back. Like, I don't think he's trying to embarrass her. I think he's sort of trying to loosen things up because you could already sort of feel the tension. Certainly Nati's trying to, do the opposite and make everything normal, right? That's clearly his job, his role in the situation.
Renee.
Okay, first of all, I agree with what you said. I think that she didn't really think about it because it wasn't something that has come up in her life. I think the car thing is an obvious thing to anybody. I mean, even people that are not Jewish know that we don't drive on Shabbat, but the particles or things that you carry on you may not be known so much. I was really concerned about the embarrassment issue too, but I think that I overlooked it only because he was clearly very drunk and he was coming from another state of mind. I don't know that he would have been, although he's kind of egotistical, he might have done it anyway, but I don't know that he would have been that openly embarrassing if he weren't drunk. But the other thing that occurred to me is that Amir and Yifat know that she's no longer, that she's wanting to be Chiloni. And so when they invited her, they should have also extended knowing that she would be coming on Shabbat some way and that it wasn't walking distance, I would have thought that they would have extended an invitation to her to stay over if she was coming, so that they didn't put her in a position where she would have to drive on Shabbos.
I don't think that we know that it wasn't in walking distance.
I mean, Re'ut seems to think that she's walking.
Right. So, because I think, yeah, I agree. So I like.
Okay, well, assuming that it wasn't.
Okay. Assuming that it wasn't, yes, they could have let her stay over. It also seems very clear that Amir wants to get his wife alone. And so I think that in a certain way, like he was already upset that there are going to be people at his dinner table, let alone, sleeping in his house. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'll share one of my stories now. I had a teacher in rabbinical school who was more from than other teachers of mine, and she would not invite over, I shouldn't say she. Anyway, this teacher would not have invited over students for Shabbos dinner if the teacher knew.
I think we know the gender at this point.
I know, but I'm that people would be driving to her house. So she didn't want to put them in a bad way. And so it was just the case that there were certain rabbinical students that got to go over for Shabbos and others who got, invited over for like Chol HaMoed Sukkot or something. And those were her standards because she wanted to make sure that even though there were certain rabbinical students who would drive on Shabbat, that she was not condoning that behavior. So I think it's a similar situation to what you're explaining. She wasn't asking people to sleep over, but to make people feel as though if you're in our home, this is how we would want you to feel comfortable and practice, at least extending that invitation, if that would make her feel, more able to be there in a comfortable way.
Or then at least the issue would have been brought up to the forefront.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, Eileen.
A lot, but whatever, doesn't matter. Yeah.
I sort of think it could have been handled quite differently. First of all, I don't think that you can control how somebody gets there, and if she comes in a taxi or otherwise, that's really on her, not on them. And if they knew that she was coming in a taxi, maybe they wouldn't have invited her. But I know we have gone to a religious home on Shabbat, and it's late at night and it's dark, 8:00, it's dark. We don't walk, so we would ride, and they know we ride, and there's no critique of it. I wouldn't think of bringing a gift, but in terms of Hadalia's bringing the gift, I think Ifat could have just simply said when she handed her the bottle is, "Thank you so much, we'll save it for another occasion," and put it away. And not given it an embarrassing touch where they're going to open it on Shabbat.
Yeah,
so,
or open the bottle, right? Prepare the what's it called? I have one also, like the Kiddush cup thingy, the Kiddush fountain. Is that what it's called? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Prepare it in the kitchen, right? So that you don't know what wine has been used, or make it so that it's just not as obvious that you're receiving something and that you're not going to be using it. Like, be grateful for the fact that you asked her to bring something and she brought something.
Right. But I think she could have also relieved the whole situation by saying, "Oh, thank you so much. We'll open this on another occasion," and just let it go at that.
For sure.
And then there would have been no opportunity for Nati or anybody else to ask for that wine, that they weren't going to use it that night. But I really think that putting the onus totally on Hadalia because she came in a taxi and brought the wine is not really her response. It's not her bad behavior. Yeah. I think they just either accept her as she is or let it go.
For sure. I forget who else I called on.
Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, since I'm big on intent tonight, that Hodaya, when she was getting dressed for Shabbos, she seemed to be trying to keep her modesty. Yeah. So I think she was at least showing, some respect for the Shabbat dinner when she was getting dressed, which I think, to her benefit. I mean, credit to her credit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, right, she's sort of trying to navigate this line between like not putting on her old frum clothes, but also like not making a scene. It's sort of like, I'm going to come in sort of a modern but somewhat sneeze outfit, like somewhat modest outfit. But
no, go
ahead. So she's like sort of trying to straddle that line of like, look, I'm like different, but I'm also still part of this chevra, like I'm still part of this group. And she, again, like I think with the wine, I don't think it even occurred to her. Like I think, she drove there, she took a taxi there, but like I don't think she realized the halachic ramifications of her bringing wine and what that would, which by the way, if she didn't know that it was a problem, then actually they could drink it on Shabbat. It's like it's only problematic if the person knows that it's a problem. If they don't know it's a problem, then in theory she shouldn't have it, but they could. But of course they don't know that. They just know that his wine has been transported on Shabbat. So I think, it's sad because she's trying. Asaf, the guy, is like, no, it's impossible. You're just, you're a masochist for even trying to straddle this line. And she thinks like, no, it's possible. These are my friends. Like, they're still my friends. And and this is like that's like a dagger. Like, it really is a dagger of like, no, and Nati just keeps digging the dagger in further. But it's like really noting like, no, you're different now. You're not the same,
Two things. Number one, I was laughing because one of the things that I think when we talk about sneeze clothing, like you could, if you remember back to that scene, you can tell what she thought would be categorically sneeze or not, right? Like when she saw that she had some cleavage, she was like trying to like lift her shirt up as far as it possibly could go. And then she knew that she had to cover her shoulders. And then she got to a place where you couldn't see her collarbone, and she was like completely covered, but then her elbows were still showing. So like, what does sneas really, really mean at the end of the day? But I think the other piece of this is that any person who goes through any kind of transformation, religious or otherwise, and has a core group of friends, you always assume that your friends are going to relate to you as you, not as the conservative or the reform or the orthodox, right? They're going to refer to you as Rebecca, or they're going to refer to you as Jeff, or they're going to, right? Like they're going to refer to you as who you are, and accept you for who you are. Exactly. And I think that for her, the piece that that guy was trying to get her to understand or to believe that she was kind of poo-pooing and then experienced in a certain way was that there's no way for them, a frum group of people, to then have her join back and have them accept her for who she was as opposed to who she is. They're always going to be concerned now that whatever she brings is not kosher. They're always going to be concerned now that if she comes for Shabbos, that she's going to have her cell phone on. They're always going to be concerned. And it's not always the case, right? It's not always the case that if you give someone, why are you smirking? That if you give someone the label of a denomination, that all of a sudden, all of a sudden you're going to be acting according to what they believe you are acting as based on your denomination. And it just isn't how you think of friends. At least it's not how I think of friends personally.
I mean, I think there's like this interesting moment. I don't know if people picked up on it, but like they call Ruth and ask her to make pasta salad. And then the next scene is Hodaya in her restaurant scooping pasta, right? And so there's sort of this interesting moment of like, it's sort of noting like, oh, Ruth can make the pasta salad. Hodaya now has the pasta, but it's in a treif restaurant and she can't, right? Like, so sort of playing on that dynamic of like, right? And Asaf is like, let me guess, they asked you to bring wine. And she was like, oh, it's a coincidence. But it's like, no, you're right. There's like, we don't, back in the day, they might have asked her to bring the pasta salad, and now they're not because they don't know the status of her kitchen and so forth. And wine seems to be, the safer bet. But I mean, I think we see, Asaf, you get the sense that, the guy who came from a religious background, right, that came up in whatever, the 2 episodes ago. And you really get the sense from him that it was like he came from like a real, like a yeshiva background, and it was sort of like he needed a clean break. Like Hodaya also comes from like a yeshiva background in some sense. Her dad's a Rosh Yeshiva. But like this group of friends isn't that. Right? These are not like black and white people. They're much more gray people. And I think Asaf sort of sees the world coming from his like yeshivish place of like, no, like they're never going to accept you. But like, actually this group of friends, I think, would accept her because they're more people who live in that gray area. And, Asaf is saying this and she's now getting this thought in her mind. And now it's just being emphasized by Nati being Nati and just sort of making bringing to the forefront of everyone's mind the ways that, her being secular have now like created a problem for them.
Nati also, and then I'll call on Debbie, Nati also is recognizing that there is a person who is is able to then transform herself and change herself. And he's trying to figure out, like, am I going to just be stuck like this, guy for forever? And he sees her as being able to change in some way. And I think he pushes her a little bit because he doesn't understand how he could possibly be able to do that. And I'm reading way into this, but I'm just going with this Josh for a second. Like, how he's going to be able to also make those changes that he wants to make. He's impressed that she's been able to make these changes and kind of wonders how to poke at her to see if she'll, break, so to speak, from the changes that she's taken on. Debbie.
So I just think it's really interesting that this group of people who are a little bit loosey-goosey with the rules, and they, man and woman by themselves in a room, for example, Yifat and Nati by themselves with nobody else there, door not open. That's really not following the rules. And they choose to really come down on Hodiah when they don't always follow the rules. Like you said, it's gray.
Yeah.
But I think they only come down on Hodiah because they know that if they pull out the wine, Nati he's gonna bring it up. And so they're trying, right, like, just because given what Nati is like right now, right? Clearly, if they pour the wine, he would say something. So they're trying to figure out a way to avoid the embarrassment. So I actually don't think the reason that they pulled the wine is that, well, I mean, part of it is like they think it's halakhically problematic. I'm just going to pull up the sources for a second so you can see why it's maybe kind of sort of halakhically problematic. But I think it's also like either way they're sort of stuck because they know that Nati is going to make a thing of it. Right, either way. I'm just going to just sort of quickly go through. This is what we were looking at before. So from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law, and this is based on a conversation in the Talmud about cooking, that it says, Hamivashal b'Shabbat, someone who cooks on Shabbat, or Sha'asa achad mishar malachot, or did one of the other forbidden activities, b'mezid asor lo leolam. If the person did it intentionally, the food is forbidden to be eaten. Ula'acherim mutar l'motzei Shabbat, but for other people, not the person who did it, but the others, on motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat, they can eat the food. Ubishogeg, if it was accidental, asor bo bayom gam le'acherim ule'erev mutar gam lo miyad. So the Shulchan Aruch here says if it was cooked on Shabbat, if it was accidental, they can enjoy it right after Shabbat. But other sources, the Bir Alach and the Mishnah Berurah, say that's only talking about cooking, which is something that's like actually changing the status of the item on Shabbat. The Bir Halacha says this explicitly. It says if a person simply carries an object in a forbidden manner, but didn't change the nature of the object, which is our case, if it was by accident, it is permitted even to the person who did the action and even during Shabbat itself. It says if it was done intentionally, it's forbidden to everyone to use until Motzei Shabbat, until after Shabbat. And then he says, nevertheless, it's better to be strict on this. But his point is, we have these sort of rules about food that's cooked on Shabbat. He says that's sort of the strictest case because you're actually physically changing the nature of the object on Shabbat. For other things that, you're doing a malacha, you're doing a forbidden action, but it's not impacting the object directly. It's not changing its nature. Like if it was done accidentally, which I think is our case, I think it's done accidentally. I think she's intentionally bringing it, but she doesn't realize that itself is problematic. Like it actually, according to this, should be okay. And the Mishnah Berurah rules similarly talking about how the Vilna Gaon follows the position of Rabbi Meir in the Gemara, which is the more lenient position, saying that with an intentional action it's forbidden, but an accidental action, anyone can benefit from it immediately. And he says in a time of need, the makom tzorech, which I think our situation is a makom tzorech, like to avoid embarrassment, this position of the Grav, the Vilna Gaon, can be relied on if somebody cooked accidentally. So, so there are legal ramifications. The last source I'm not going to get into is from Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who's the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, who had cases of people bringing water to the base on Shabbat and sort of what happens there. But the general takeaway is, four things that are not changing this nature of the object. If it's accidental, it's fine. It's better not. It would be better for them not to, bring it in a car. But if the person didn't know that they couldn't bring it in a car, you can at least in a makom tzorech, at least in a time of need, you can utilize it. You can, and so, I mean, I know for me, like I've had friends come over for Shabbat and bring a bottle of wine, and like kosher wine or a babka or something, that's packaged, and like I've served that at the meal because it's like they went out, someone who doesn't keep kosher and went through the trouble of getting a kosher wine or getting a kosher babka, like. It's they don't know that like bringing it in a car is changing is something like could create problems. They have no idea. And so it's it's easier, obviously, it's avoiding embarrassment, but also I think in terms of like trying to bring people closer to, and for people who've shared experiences of like going to rabbis' houses or things where, they brought wine. I think that's part of the reason is like, it's not bringing anyone closer to Judaism to embarrass them publicly for something that they're trying. They're going and getting the Trader Joe's babka that they know is kosher, or going and finding a kosher wine. Like, they're really trying. So how are you helping by saying, nope, sorry, you screwed up, Renee?
I think the other thing that they could have done also, which is something that I've done with friends that I've invited for Shabbat that don't keep kosher or my level of kashrut, is if they want to contribute to the dinner, extend an invitation for them to come to my house and help me prepare for Shabbat.
Yeah.
So that way they feel like they're helping or contributing something to the meal, but we both know that it's going to be kosher.
So the one thing, and this is a story about Rabbi Pernick's brother, or Rabbi Pernick's son, whichever way you want to phrase it. One of the things that I often do is for people who are coming to my home for Shabbat, if they ask that they can bring something, I'm very specific about what they can bring. Because if you then say, no, don't worry about it, most of the time someone will bring something. And there are certain things that if someone brings on Shabbat, they're like even, I don't know if I would say more problematic, but like there's less that you can do with them to make it seem like that you're appreciating what they brought than if it's a bottle of wine. So flowers is one of those things, because you're not supposed to put flowers in water on when Shabbat has started. So one of Rabbi Pernick's siblings, or one of Rabbi Pernick's sons, came to my house for Shabbos dinner and entered the house with a ginormous bottle of Manischewitz, which I had never seen such a large bottle of Manischewitz in my life. And I said, wow, thank you so much. Like, what made you think that you needed to bring this? And he said, well, I knew I shouldn't bring flowers, which was just like the sweetest, he wanted to bring something, but he didn't want to bring something that would be so problematic. So he brought something else. And it was just such a sweet gesture to say, like, I looked up, or I knew enough to not do this thing. So I wanted to make an impact, and I wanted to bring something nice. And so I brought something that I knew could be useful. And I think that's exactly what is happening in this scenario, is that Yifat and Amir know that if they ask her not to bring anything, that is going to be more, I don't know, denigrating, like that. It's going to take her down, as opposed to saying, please bring wine. And then the way that she brings it is the way that she brings it. But again, I don't think that she knew the difference. And she's doing something kind for the household, for her friends, for Shabbat. And it's a nice thing. And you just say thank you and you move on. And whether or not you use the Manischewitz or that bottle of wine on Shabbat is neither here nor there. But the way in which the hosts react to the gift being given to them, I think, makes all the difference.
Sorry, was that a hand?
Something I was going to say,
Yes,
are we for sure that she was not in walking distance? Because, did they live where there's an Eruv that she could have carried?
Yeah, I think that she's still in walking distance, which is why Re'ud is like, what's the problem with, like, why aren't we drinking Hodaya's wine?
Yeah.
And Nati's like, because she drove in a taxi. And Ruth's like, oh, she did? Because, like, right, it's presumably, right, Re'ud thinks she's walking, so, it appears that she's still in walking distance. And by the way, I'll just bring back up the source sheet. This Psikah of Rabbi Shlomo Goren, talking about water that's brought to a military base, he says, if the water was brought from a place which could have been reached by foot, even with difficulty, there is room to be lenient, to permit the water when there is no other drinking water, even if it was knowingly brought by motor vehicle. So he says we can actually be more lenient if it could have been brought by walking. The person nevertheless brought it driving, but like it could, it wasn't like this water was inaccessible and, it couldn't have been brought and now it was brought. Like if it could have been brought, just with difficulty and someone drove, we can actually be more lenient because like it wasn't something that you didn't have access to at all, something you could have had access to, and it was just brought in a problematic way.
The Eruv is a really good point, though, because if they believed that she lived within the Eruv, then she should have been totally fine, obviously not putting like a car aside. You're right that they were asking her to bring something that they thought would be totally useful and fine to use at their Shabbos table without any kind of worry.
It's interesting. Rebecca brings up that she posed in front of the mirror holding the wine to match her outfit. I didn't notice that, but
I also didn't notice that. It's funny.
Well, the first outfit that she rejected, she was holding the wine, seeing how she looked. And then she thought, no, I don't know if it was the wine or the outfit, but she ended up changing her outfit.
Interesting.
I had a question. If somebody comes from outside the Eruv and is carrying it outside the Eruv, but still walking to get to the dinner, is that okay? Because is it just the individual who's breaking something or whatever by carrying outside the Eruv, or does that make it unkosher?
So it's really the same. I mean, it's the same as this case. It's the same as going in a taxi if it's being brought, partially from outside the Eruv. And actually, I mean, I cut just a piece of the Rabbi Shlomo Goren Psak here, his ruling, but it also talks about techumim. If you're in one techum, one area, and then you travel, there's only a certain distance that you can travel on Shabbat, regardless of Eruv, just like it's called a techum, like an English version word, an area, essentially. And so that's like also, part of the conversation, but fundamentally carrying would be, a Torah level prohibition that doesn't impact the nature of the object, just like driving it in a taxi is similarly a Torah level problem that doesn't change the nature of the object. So it would be sort of the same.
One of the ways that you could also ask this question that's even kind of more problematic is if a person doesn't know if the Eruv is up or down, right? So if the Eruv is down and you think the Eruv is up because you just assume, since you live in Los Angeles, that the Eruv must always be up. Well, it's not always up. And so if you bring something to someone's home and they know that the Eruv was down, but you walked from wherever outside their home to get to them, then what do they do? And in that particular case, just like every other case we've spoken about, I personally would just assume that they didn't know that it was down, because unless you're someone like a crazy person like me who checks to see if the Eruv is up or down, like you're not going to assume that they went onto that website to see if it's up or down. So that's another way in which it's just like, halachically, it's just like getting into a car, but they would have had no idea that they were, quote, getting into a car by walking outside because they didn't know the Eruv was down. Leonard, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have an Eruv suggestion.
Oh, great.
I mean, because some places have bigger Eruvs than others. The one here in Los Angeles is enormous. But it seems to me you could solve the whole problem by making an Eruv that's, say, 5 by 5 feet. And you say it basically is encompassing the entire world except the part in the middle over there. The Eruv is on the outside, so to speak, of the fence rather than on the inside, and therefore the entire world would be covered by an Eruv.
There's a limited number of people who can fit. Yeah, that's one of the rules of an Eruv. Is there has to be less than a certain number of people who are traversing through it over the course of Shabbat. But otherwise, that would be a very good plan. But there, that's why like the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, there can never be a Eruv in Brooklyn or Manhattan. Or what?
Or Los Angeles. That's why you see people walking with their talitot.
Oh yeah. So because big cities that have, especially, interstates and highways become big problems if they're sort of within an Eruv, because then you could have thousands of people passing through. I don't remember the exact numbers. That's an issue, is the number of people who might be, right? Because the whole idea of an Eruv is you're constructing an artificial private domain, but if there's 6 billion people in your private domain, it's not a very private domain, Rashut Yachid. So.
That's also outside the idea of Rashut Harabim, so you couldn't do that. 6 billion.
I'm saying if it was like the entire world, like
yeah. No. Bonnie, do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead. Bonnie, yeah. You just have to unmute. Yeah.
I don't understand how it desecrates my own Shabbat if somebody comes to my house on Shabbat who does not keep of the Shabbat traditions. What is the law that says, I could never then invite a non-Jewish person for Shabbat. I could never invite somebody from the valley unless they stay at my house. How is that, like you said, how is that embracing and enhancing somebody else's experience? But what is the law that says my personal observance is compromised if somebody else doesn't observe Shabbat?
So one of the pieces to kind of differentiate in your comment is that it has nothing to do with the human, right? So if a person drives from the valley to get to the city in Los Angeles, I don't know how to make that relevant to anybody else, but far away, like 20 minutes away, you have to be in a car to get to you in the city, Bonnie. By them walking into your home, nothing has happened. Nothing's happened. They can walk into your home and sit with you and have Shabbos with you. They can even check their phone at your table. They being in your presence has done nothing to your home, nothing to your Shabbat. What we're talking about is the item, here we're talking about a bottle of wine, that would be transported in a way in which it then categorizes the wine not as unkosher, but just as having been prepared, so to speak, in such a way that isn't seemly for Shabbat. So just like you wouldn't cook your chicken for Friday night dinner at 6 o'clock if candlelighting was at 5:45, you, by inviting someone into your home with a bottle of wine that got to you via a vehicle once Shabbat had already started, that wine is now considered to be, quote, cooked or prepared or made into something that was not for Shabbat. So it's not the person, it's the item. And again, that's why it's also very easy for us to say, just put this aside and say thank you and figure out either a way that you are going to use it or a way that you are going to try to put it aside and not use it, and have it be the thing that you use the next time those people come over. But it's not denigrating to you, not to the person, not really even to the object, but you are careful about those objects just like you would be careful about your own cooking.
I'll emphasize that.
Somebody else was saying that she was invited to a person's house but had to stay there. They wouldn't accept her if she came and then left.
So I don't think it's about accepting, right? I think it's more so about this idea that if you are a person who is uncomfortable getting in a vehicle on Shabbat, and your home is therefore a place that would not encourage those in it to drive on Shabbos, then inviting that person to stay over is your way of saying, if you are only driving to get to me because that is your only way of getting to me, come to me before Shabbat and stay with me over Shabbat. Right? You're not forcing the person to stay in your home. That's called kidnapping. But the idea of inviting them to be in your home, because if you didn't do that, they might be driving only for the purpose of being with you, which they might not like either. You're offering them the chance to stay. I don't think that, I forget who it was, but I don't think that the person was suggesting that the person had to stay over. It's just that it's an option so that they don't have to drive.
I thought that she was not welcome unless she stayed. Maybe that's...
No, I don't think so. But Rabbi Pernick wanted to add or suggest.
No, I
misunderstood.
So I was going to emphasize like one point that Rabbi Schatz made a minute ago about, she said maybe you just pull out that bottle of wine the next time that person comes, because remember, it said that wine, and this is, I think, something that's misunderstood often. That wine isn't unkosher now because it was transported on Shabbat. It just can't be used on this Shabbat, again, assuming it was brought intentionally. But to be, but once Shabbat is done, that wine is fine. It's still kosher wine. So the following Shabbos, you could pull it out and be like, oh, you said that? Okay. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that point. You said it, but I want to emphasize it.
I don't understand that logic, because to me, it seems like, and just forgive me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like you're playing like a technicality either with Judaism or a technicality with God. And like, yeah, we can't use it this Shabbat, but next Shabbat is fine. And to me, it's like, God's like, really? I
mean, first
God really cares.
First of all, yes, like lots of Jewish lies, technicalities, and how to get around them. So yeah, and also remember that, as Rabbi Pernick was saying and emphasizing what I had said about the wine, the wine is not unkosher. I mean, the wine could be unkosher, but if it's a kosher bottle of wine and it shows up on Shabbat, it is not now deemed unusable or unkosher in life. It's just deemed a thing that if you have a way of not using that Shabbat, it might be preferable, because if you use it the next Shabbat, or if you use it the next Wednesday, it's just a bottle of wine. If it arrived to you on Shabbat for use on that Shabbat, it's, to go back to Jeff's whole theme of the evening, it's all about the intention. It was brought to your home on Shabbat to be used for Shabbat, that Shabbat. So if you bring it last Friday and you just don't get to it, that's kind of how I usually end up dealing with these situations. You just don't get to that bottle of wine because you happen to have other bottles of wine to use. Then the next time those people come over, you say, remember this bottle of wine you brought? Let's use it this Shabbos. And then that's how you kind of can get around that. I've never talked about wine transportation as much as I have this evening.
Yeah. I think it's a topic that people also like Hodaya didn't know about. I think it's like a misunderstood topic on both directions. I think there are people who think like, oh, it's now non-kosher. And like, no, it's not it's still kosher wine. It's just, all of that. And, and I think other people just have no idea that it's even a problem. So yeah, I think it's
to Norm's point for a second. Yeah, Norm, I think that is, first of all, that is conservative Judaism in a sentence right there. And that's how most people read the driving tshuva, which is not what the driving tshuva says, but that's how most people read that tshuva, because they want to be able to go to someone's home on Shabbat, and they might have, especially in Los Angeles, might have to drive to get there if it's a particular distance. And so a lot of conservative Jews will say, but I'm allowed to drive for the sake of Shabbat, if it's for the celebration of Shabbat, and so I'm going to drive. And so I think that the way in which we are talking right now about bringing wine and bringing those things, like often I will invite people to come before candlelighting, and when it's not like candlelighting at 3:45 or something, so that they are arriving before Shabbos, whether that's comfortable for them or more comfortable for me. But that is one way around that, because you are not alone in this idea.
I know that that's not the halacha. That simply is what we do in our family.
Yeah, but it has become a major conservative halacha, for lack of a better term, like an observance that conservative Jews feel very comfortable with, in terms of how they can celebrate Shabbat with the people who they want to celebrate Shabbat with. And that's how I grew up, and I totally get it and see a lot of validity in it. I just thought I just saw a hand. I did. Yeah, Rebecca and Leonard, or both.
Yeah, I was just thinking, sometimes we have at Beth Am, the library minyan, one of the minyanim we have some events, and we'll have like potluck Shabbat dinners, for example. And in the sign up for people, and as we arrange this, we've always said and continue to say that you can drop off your selection, your dish or whatever, you can drop it off before Shabbat, that morning or something, arrange with the the host. And it's funny because I always just kind of thought that way it's convenient. People don't have to, because some people do walk, so they don't have to carry it, even though it'd be within the Eruv. But now I see another reason is perhaps people really do know and are purposely dropping it off. So they're dropping it off before Shabbat because maybe they are going to then drive that night. So
yeah, leave it to the library, Minion. That makes total sense.
Yeah, got it covered.
Okay, Renee, last comment.
Okay, I still don't get the wine thing. Like, I get that it's okay to have it, but because it's kosher wine. But how is it okay for them to have it dafka on another Shabbat? I get that they could have it on a Tuesday or Thursday, but whether she intentionally or not intentionally transgressed the Shabbos with that wine bottle, the ikar is the ikar. It was brought on Shabbat. So how would it be okay for her to use it then on another Shabbat?
So I'll try to take this. The idea is that we don't want to either be benefiting directly from malacha done on Shabbat, from forbidden labor done on Shabbat, or incentivizing malacha to be done on Shabbat. Those are the two things we're trying to avoid. We don't want to incentivize it, and we don't want to benefit from malacha being done on Shabbat.
Okay.
So in this case, when it comes to the wine, once a week has passed, right, there was a week's worth of opportunities for that person to bring that wine to your house. So you're not actually benefiting from the fact that it was brought on Shabbat, right? It could have been brought another time in the intervening. That's the same idea of, when the Shulchan Aruch says, come Motzei Shabbat, it's fine. The idea is once Motzei Shabbat, once Shabbat is out, now you're not benefiting from the labor done on Shabbat because you could have done it right now. And some people say actually you should wait if it comes to cooking, you should wait the amount of time. If it cooked for an hour on Shabbat, you should wait until an hour after Shabbat to make sure that you're not benefiting from it because there was sort of the same amount of time of malacha that was done to it has now passed since Shabbat. So we're sort of trying to make sure there's no incentive to do the malacha on Shabbat. Now, you might say there's an incentive because the people were at your house last Shabbat and they weren't going to be in your house in the intervening days. But the idea is you're not directly benefiting from malacha done on Shabbat. It could have been done in another.
It's a great line.
Yeah.
Okay.
It totally is, but it also comes from not wanting to waste, and it also comes from wanting to make sure that you get to use something that someone brought to your home out of the love of their heart, right? Like you're not trying to say you did a terrible thing, like you did a malacha. Like is it great? Like, do we want you to continue doing it? No, but you also, it's not the end of the world, and so you're going to benefit by having wine in your house. And you're going to get to use it whenever you want after Shabbos. And now it's just another bottle of wine in your wine refrigerator.
It's like if you pick an apple from your tree on Shabbat, you can't pick on Shabbat. Like once Shabbat is out, again, you could have just gone outside after Shabbat and picked that apple. So now the fact that you picked it on Shabbat doesn't actually impact the object. You could have taken it after Shabbat. So yeah, that's so now it's just another apple. So yeah, the halachic, there's one of the categories of prohibited things on Shabbat is what's called nolad, which is something that was sort of born literally or created on Shabbat, and so it's not exactly nolad, but it's sort of there's a lot of similarities in that area of law of like an egg or something that grew or that was quote unquote born on Shabbat, you can't use on Shabbat, but then after Shabbat it's fine. So it's sort of, there's similarities there with something that entered your possession on Shabbat that you didn't have access to before Shabbat. As long as Shabbat is ongoing, you can't benefit from it. But once Shabbat is passed, now nolad no longer applies.
Okay. And the flowers in the water, because I've never heard that before.
Oh, are you asking? I mean, you're just not supposed to do. You're not supposed to do things that would be categories of like planting or gardening or allowing something to grow. So in terms of flowers, you wouldn't want to put them in the water on Shabbat. You could wait until after Shabbat and then put them in the water after that, or just put them in a empty vase, I guess. But like the flowers themselves are not the issue. It's the putting them in the water that's the issue.
Even though they're not going to grow anymore when you put it in water. I mean, once they've been cut, they're not going to grow.
Right, but you're keeping them alive. So that's part of what it's like in a category of what planting would be, even though you're not, like, no new flowers are going to grow from it, you're still maintaining its life.
Am I correct in assuming that these rules would not apply to chametz that arrives in your home on Pesach?
Wait, chametz that arrive, meaning what? Like if someone brings a loaf of bread to your house on like the 4th day of Pesach, is it okay for after Pesach? Is that what you're asking?
What actually happened one year is that the newspaper arrived with a little box of cereal in it. And some people were extremely upset and wrote terrible letters to the Times. And we simply put it in the trash. And I imagine some people probably gave it away, and maybe some people saved it. I don't know. But we assumed that it simply should be treated as dust, and we threw it in the trash so that nobody would benefit from it.
Yeah, chametz she'avar alav haPesach is forbidden. Chametz that was alive for a Passover, you can't eat after Passover, unless, of course, we sell it, which is another legal loophole. But yeah, that would.
If you sold it before Pesach, yes, but if it arrived during Pesach, you can't.
And it entered your possession, then that would fall under the category of chametz she'avar alav haPesach, which you can't use. So yeah, throwing it out was the correct thing.
Good.
And sort of,
Giving it away to a goy.
Yeah, I mean, as long it shouldn't
keep it in your house.
Ideally, it should never really enter your possession, essentially.
Right.
So.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.